Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, host and head bookologist here at the Get Literate podcast. I'm a book-loving, notebook-hoarding reader and writer on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. On this podcast, we explore the power of bookology and leading literate lives. We talk all things books and reading and notebooks and writing, mixed in with mindful practices and creativity to create lives we love. You can expect regular weekly episodes focused on 3 books you need to know about on a bookish theme and how to bring those themes to life in our actual lives too. You can also expect author interviews, notebooking inspiration, and topics to help us grow through what we go through and take inspired action to make our lives better. So grab a notebook and your TBR list and let's get literate. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Get Literate podcast. Today I am here with a special guest who is going to talk to us about a genre that I bet most of us don't bring into our reading lives regularly, or at least I don't, or maybe I didn't bring them into my life regularly. And that is the genre of fairy tales. So Donna Fields, I am so excited to welcome you to the podcast today. We both have a topic that we wholeheartedly believe in, which is reading can change our lives, like literally. And while I love to talk about lots of different topics and genres on this podcast, you're here to help us dive into one particular genre that can be quite powerful, and that's fairy tales. So why don't we begin with introductions? Can you tell listeners who you are, where you are, and how this topic became your passion?
Sure. My name is Donna Fields. I'm originally from New York. I'm really a New Yorker. It's very hard to get that out of one's system once you live in New York, which can be a great thing, can be something frustrating for other people. I moved to New Mexico after I was looking for something different, and there can't be much different between Manhattan and New Mexico and the mountains of Santa Fe. And I became a teacher there, wasn't sure that I'd actually follow the profession, but found that I absolutely loved it. What happened is that in New Mexico, it was very important to speak Spanish. So I came to Spain for a month thinking, it'll take me a month to learn Spanish, no problem. 22 years later, still working with it, but very, very happy. I've been a teacher for primary, secondary, university, gave English classes, and then just because I love learning, I kept going back to school. So I got my master's in Spain, then I got my doctorate in Spain. And what did I choose for doctorate? Fairy tales. You asked me, how did I get interested in fairy tales? We all read fairy tales when we're young. Mm-hmm. And either we were talking before, either it just sort of fades to the background, it never disappears. Or like me, you do something absolutely crazy and decide to do your doctorate on it. So
which I love. I love that. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I told you that it's really nice to speak with someone else who has a passion for fairy tales, because usually I have to sort of preface whenever I talk about my doctor with, yes, it's a serious study. It's not a paradox. So
yes, I agree with you there. People ask me, what is your PhD in? And I'll say reading. And they'll say, you needed a PhD to figure that out? It's like, oh, come on. There's a little bit more. But I love that you dove deep into that aspect, into that passion of yours. And, it really made me think about my own reading life, because I love keeping track of my reading life. For better or for worse, for people who think I'm very type A, I am, but I keep track in a book journal. I keep track in a bookish spreadsheet. Like, I go all out in tracking my reading life. And the one genre that is never usually there, even though I enjoy them, I don't tend to read fairy tales, adaptations of them, updated versions of them. It's just not something that's been in my reading life. And I didn't quite realize the gap until I started talking to you and realized that it wasn't there. And I'm wondering, based on your study, why is it that as kids, we are just surrounded by fairy tales, or at least at least people were. I'm assuming it's still something that kids grow up learning, at least the Disney version. Why do you think it's something that is important in childhood, but tends to be left out of our reading lives as we go into our adult reading lives?
Well, I would say it's a very interesting perspective. The question itself is very interesting. Why do we stop reading fairy tales when we're adults? I'd say that we never stop reading fairy tales. They're just called something different. Sometimes they're called folk tales. Sometimes they're just called profiling in newspapers. We love to make judgments about things, and we're taught to make judgments through fairy tales. And depending on the culture, we make judgments based on the fairy tales that we're told, that we read, that sort of thing. So I would say that it's always in the background. It's always something. Fairy tales are ostensibly simple and they're ostensibly black and white. And yet there's so many different shades of meaning. And when you and I began talking, I picked up my thesis again, and I went back to looking at my fairy tale books all over my shelves because, like you, I read all the time. I do not make lists of them like you do. I give books away and give books away, but my fairy tale books stay. And I thought, these are really the foundations of what I believe, for better or for worse. And some of the listeners may understand this. I think fairy tales, if we don't really think about them and don't explore our own judgments about how we see the world and other people, they can be really detrimental. And one thing I'll say is that Walt Disney is one of the most detrimental interpretations of fairy tales that there are. I don't know how you feel about that, Stephanie.
We talk about this a lot in my children's literature classes. Yes, the societal, understanding versus the actual understanding, the intent, the cultural appropriation, all of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a different way of seeing it. So I won't really dwell on his viewpoint. I think that it's gotten a little better in the newer versions of Disney, but it took the stereotypes to a new level and it gave them even less depth. And people really believed them. And I was one of those people. So maybe one of the reasons why I decided to really delve into them is because in sort of the subconscious, I was bothered by how much they affected my outlook on life. Why was I waiting for a prince to come? I'm very good at taking care of myself. Why did I see someone who challenged me as evil? A lot of times that really makes me a better person. So the study of the fairy tales was absolutely fascinating to me. And I thought, I'm going to start it and then really dislike fairy tales in the end. And the truth is, the more I studied them, the more interesting they became. So you tell me when I can start talking about the really depth of fairy tales and how they can bring out so many different facets of ourselves.
Yes, let's do that. Because as you were talking, I kept thinking in my mind, what we read matters. It matters about how we think about ourselves. It matters about how we think others, about the world, and what we choose to surround ourselves with, including our reading material, our media, of course. It influences everything, which then has this ripple effect. So I would love for you to go there.
And I absolutely love what you just said. What we read affects, it really and does influence ourselves. When I was in New Mexico, my first practice teaching was at the Indian school. And at that school, what I learned from the Native Americans is that what you say matters. And coming from New York, where verbalization is very important, and the faster you speak, the more intelligent you seem to be, which is absolutely not true. But they would say to me, stop talking. We're overloaded with talking because words matter. And so what you're saying is words on the paper matter as well. And I absolutely agree. It goes deep into our brain. You were saying in the very beginning that reading changes lives. I probably agree with that. I just put it a different way. When I open a book, I absolutely dive into the story. And if it's a positive story, then it affects me positively. If it has messages, even subliminal messages that are not really healthy, that's what I'm taking on. So not only do we need to be careful about what we say, we need to be careful what we read and educate ourselves and become educated in what we're reading and saying.
Yes, there is a quote, and I can never remember who says it. So if a listener does, you'll have to put it in the show notes, but it's the quote that says you are the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with the most. And when I think about that, that just opens new possibilities of what if we were the average of the books we chose to read? What if we were the average of the media we chose to watch or listen to or view? And I think that really captures what you're just saying. It all matters. It all impacts us, whether we know it or not, whether it's conscious or unconscious, we are taking those messages. And so a thoughtful examination of them, of what are we reading and how is it making us feel and how is it changing us? That's really, I think, where the power of reading comes in. And especially for fairy tales, because there are so many things to take away from fairy tales.
There are a lot of things to take in from fairy tales, and what I really loved about studying them was reading the versions. And the farther back we go, the more interesting it got. And again, the Walt Disney versions are the most known ones, and they're the most simplified and black and white ones. And yet, when you go back even further, they're pretty gruesome.
Yes.
They have stories that are very important to the people at the time. I mean, they were created by people who were either suffering in poverty or by, kings and queens, literally kings and queens in their country who were oppressing them. And it was their way of sort of exercising the angst in their lives. And there are a lot of archetypes, and those archetypes are important. What we need to do, though, is really look at those archetypes. And that's what I did in when I was studying them. What I did is I studied the witch as the heroine of the stories. And the witch is a metaphor for any person or thing or event that challenges you. And there are some people that are affronted by challenges and sort of cower. And I would encourage them to stand up and look those challenges in the face and take the lesson. And you'll be so much proud of yourself for doing it. And then there are others who see them as challenges right away. And, if we really see them as challenges, the more we interact with them as a positive force in our lives, then the more we see them more quickly as positive challenges. And so in the fairy tales, I saw the witch as a metaphor. And she is absolutely fascinating. And you give me any fairy tale, I will show you how the witch or the ogre or whomever who is looked as evil is actually a positive force in the story.
I love this. I love this. It's, okay, I'm really fascinated now because you're flipping the switch here. They're flipping the script on what we normally think, about the witches or the challenging ones. And again, I can never remember where the things that cross my mind come from. But, I hear so often that when you are personally affronted and you're personally challenged, when you're feeling angry or you're feeling shame or you're annoyed at this person, it's usually not the person. It's something in you that is being called up because of what you see. It's not that you're angry at that person or jealous at that person or whatever. It's just something in you that you have to think about. And that's exactly what you're saying by reorienting, shifting our whole idea of that. I love that. That's fascinating. No wonder you went into depth in this.
Oh my goodness, there's so much you can do. And it's reframing. For me, I say it's reframing, which really helps, puts no judgment on it. It just says, how can we reframe this? So I'll just give you a couple of examples if that works for you.
Yes.
My favorite, I have a couple of favorites. Rapunzel is my favorite, especially because there are versions that go way back. And then Psyche and Eros is one of my favorite. In the modern day, we'd probably say the Seven Swans. Again, there are types of fairy tales that are grouped together. So there are a lot of ones under Rapunzel, for instance, but I think I just take Rapunzel and show you how the witch is really her best friend. So
okay, let's do it.
If you go to most of the versions, it has just the princess in the tower. And you're thinking, why is this poor girl in the tower? It's kidnapping, it's taking away the power of this beautiful young princess. And beautiful is something we're going to talk about as well. And hopefully I'll get back to that. If you look at some of the oldest versions, you'll see how she got there. And what happened is that her father decided to, let me start with the mother. The mother is usually the docile one who either dies or plays no interesting role in the story. But the mother is pregnant and she has cravings. So she asked the father to go get this type of fruit, which is called rapungos, in the garden of the witch next door. And he does. So he's completely complicit. He's like, I'll go to get this fruit for you because, you know, you're the one that tells me what to do and I'm going to listen to you. He's caught by the witch. And she says, what are you doing in my garden? Why are you stealing this fruit? And he says, my wife really needs this. What do you want in return? She said, okay, I want your child in return. And he's thinking, now, which do I do? Get in trouble by the witch or get in trouble by my wife? I'm going to deal with the witch later. And the whole idea is that the witch takes her, he puts her in this tower. Why? Well, one of the reasons she can say is these narcissistic parents don't really care about her. They just traded her away for a piece of fruit. So I'm doing her a favor. In some of the oldest versions, she is in that tower surrounded by libraries of books, books, and more books. So she is in that tower being educated. And most of the versions, again, do not have this, but that detail is really important. She's in a tower with books. The witch takes care of her every single day. She has put her in this tower to get her. She is also beautiful. Let's get back to the beauty. If she had been brought up by her mother and father, she would have been lauded for her beauty, not for her intelligence. The witch decided she was going to make this girl understand what was self-awareness, confidence, what she had inside of herself that was beautiful. So when the prince finally comes and says, I'm going to take you away, if we notice really carefully, she is the one that lets him into the tower. She decides that he's the one, and she shows a lot of confidence. She shows a lot of discernment. I could go on and on and on about this, but hopefully I'm giving you sort of an outline of what actually is going on. The witch has prepared her. Now, if you're going to talk about the fact that afterwards she throws the prince out of the window and she shaves the girl's hair and sends her off to the desert, which does happen in the story, shaving the hair off the girl is showing her one more time, do not depend on your beauty out in the world. Depend on the intelligence that I haven't helped you develop in your mind. And for the prince, forget about him until you realize that you can take care of yourself. And when he finally finds you, he's going to appreciate you all the more. One way to look at the story, one way I like to look at the story, the witch is the heroine.
Yeah, well, and I'll be honest, that is not how I grew up thinking about Rapunzel. So that's fascinating that over time and media and culture of how different the original intent of the fairy tale has changed and how that has impacted millions and millions of little girls.
Yes, and little boys, Stephanie, and little boys. Right. Because in most societies, the boy is supposed to be the provider. And there's a lot of pressure on the boys to be the provider when they don't really need to be. And the girl needs to realize that she does not need to be saved. She saves herself. All she needs to do is develop those skills that will help her survive in the world the way she wants to, find her passion and her strength. So you give me any story and I could probably do this. Probably no, I have done the same.
Do you have a favorite?
Well, Rapunzel probably is the favorite because I love all of the details of it. The one with Psyche and Eris is also my favorite, one of my, most cherished because it has to do with the Greek myths. And I don't know if we'd call it a fairy tale, but it is a form of a fairy tale. And if we're going to talk about types, we can say that one of them is Sleeping Beauty. Now, I'm not a big fan of Sleeping Beauty, but it's the same idea where in most of the older versions, she doesn't just appear in the forest and the prince comes, finds her, and she's been there sleeping 100 years. Usually she's been sent by the stepmother, the witch, often to the forest or often to a cabin in the woods or something like that, and she sleeps. Well, there's a reason for this. All of a sudden, Snow White she's experiencing puberty. She's not ready for it. A lot of times in a lot of the versions, the father, the king himself, is attracted to his own daughter. And the witch, the stepmother, wants her out of the house to save her. Maybe because she's a little bit jealous, maybe, but we could also say that it's to help the girl get away from an incestuous, unhealthy relationship. So she sends her out into the woods. 100 years just means it's more metaphorical for let me get used to my body changing and my sexuality. And yes, off in the woods, I can do this safely and by myself. So it's another take on the stepmother really looking out for the benefit of the girl, of the princess.
So you mentioned another fairy tale that I hadn't heard. What was the one you just mentioned before Sleeping Beauty?
It's
The
not
Greek
Psyche
one.
and Eros. Sorry?
Yes. Yeah, I don't
Psyche and
know.
Eros.
Never heard of that.
Maybe under different names. Again, it's a Greek myth, maybe under the Roman. I'm not sure what it would be in Roman, the Roman names. Very bad on my part. But yeah, it's about Psyche, who is a mortal girl who is just lauded for her beauty. And her parents actually parade her around the city once a month, I think, showing her beauty and saying, you know, who's good enough for my daughter because of how she looks. And Eros comes down, the god of love, and sees her and wants her and kidnaps her and puts her away in one of the, you know, castles in the sky and says, you just wait here, and whenever I come, you know, I'll pleasure you, and I'll give you a great life. It sounds really wonderful, but you're stuck in a cloud in the sky and completely dependent on a god, a boy, a male, to take care of you, and you need to pretty much have sex just whenever he wants you to. Not a really nice image if you look literally what's going on.
No.
But what happens is she takes charge. She finds out who he is. She goes out and tries to find him. His mother, who is Aphrodite, you know, one of the most formidable goddesses, doesn't like her, and she gives her tasks to do. And what does Psyche do? She does the tasks, and she grows, she matures, she develops confidence. So by the end of these tasks, she actually confronts Eros, and she says, are you good enough for me? And he has to mature. She forces him to mature, to actually to form a union again, but it's under her terms at this point. So Aphrodite in this point is the stepmother, she's the witch, and she, intentionally or not, however you want to look at it, I say intentionally, she looks at this girl and says, you're really beautiful, you're not good enough for my son right now, I'm going to make you good enough and even better than he is. So she's actually helping her son mature as well. I mean, how much fun is this?
This is a lot of fun. And you know, in our original kind of talk about this as fairy tales, learning from fairy tales as metaphors for life, like you've got me thinking about my own witches, right? My own situations where my first impression is one thing. And then I think, well, wait a minute. Maybe this isn't really the case. Maybe what if I flipped this whole situation in my life upside down? What if I flipped this whole perception of this person or this thing or this whatever? What would that tell me? Because I'm sitting here kind of in awe of, I have never thought that before of that particular fairy tale. And what else does that mean that maybe I haven't thought because I just didn't take the different spin on it? So talk about moving the fairy tale learning to life learning right there. That's like some life coaching right there, Donna.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you, it's not a secret, a little secret. I told you that I'm into education. I'm a teacher trainer. I absolutely am passionate about what I do. Not many people know that I got my doctorate in fairy tales. They think that I got my doctorate in education. I don't really share it very often, but I really love doing fairy tales.
Oh, you need to. This is fascinating stuff. At least to us.
Well, we'll talk about that another time. But what I was going to respond to is how it appears, how it manifests in real life. I had a narcissistic mother. I mean, queen of narcissism, unbelievable. And I didn't really understand what narcissism was when I was growing up. My sister had to tell me once I was an adult. And I looked at it, even before I understood what narcissism was, I saw it as my challenge. She was my witch, and boy, was she good at it. So instead of looking at it like, oh, woe is me, this is so difficult. Oh, you know, this woman is just unbelievably suppressive, and I just can't take it anymore. I thought, what she's actually doing is she's challenging me every single day to either outthink her or do something different or find some way to do what I was doing better, because nothing satisfied her. And if you understand anything about narcissism, it's they need someone to mirror back at them what they think they are. I didn't really do that, so I had a lot of conflicts, but the conflicts changed my life, and I'm so glad for all of it. So that's how it manifests in my life. And actually, Stephanie, if you don't mind, I'm just going to share one thing with you.
Please.
I did my doctorate with a director who didn't really understand what I was doing. He was incredibly supportive, and God bless him, because he let me really take reign over what I was doing. And at one point I went into him and I said, all right, I've had enough. I don't talk to my parents anymore. I see them with more perspective. I don't need to do this fight anymore. I don't need to finish this doctorate. I understand who the witch is. I understand what her role is in my life. I'm through. And he looked at me, because he had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. And he said, so when is your next version due? Let's talk about that. So I kept going. But the point is, I was pretty aware of what it was, very therapeutic doing this.
Right. Right. Which is why I think you should be shouting it from more rooftops, because it really is it's such a different way of looking at a genre most of us have read and accepted universally because we're kids and that's what we do. And this must be true. And to completely flip the script like that is not only something, you know, that we can do in our reading life, but as you showed, it's giving us a new perspective, a new tool, a new way to do that work in a safe space of a book, but then kind of dipping our toes into what would it look like in our own lives if we re-examined them that way. So you got to tell everybody your doctorate is in fairy tales and start speaking that all over the place.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but you love strategies to read, and you love helping people sort of become more stronger readers. And all I would say is encourage them to go read between the lines as well. And I'm sure that's part of your strategy, but encourage them to turn it around and see how many meanings could be possible, whether they believe them or not. Look at what you're reading. We started off saying how important it is to think about our choices, and whatever choices we make, we need to really analyze them and look at them from as many perspectives as possible, which is also why reading multicultural books is really interesting and fascinating, because there are messages we probably don't understand the first time we read, and we need to find the cultural message by the author or by the people who are reading it. And it just gives it whole other depth.
Yeah. You know, in my reading journal that I mentioned, or my book journal in the beginning of the episode, I do have certain things I look for as I read. You know, I don't track the typical characters and summary and that literal stuff. What I track are the quotes that jump out at me, the life lessons I'm taking away, the themes that I see. And I'm imagining a new question on a sticky note in my journal that's exactly what you said. How many meanings could be possible? Whether I agree with them or not, how many meanings, how many interpretations could be possible that could really give me a broader view of whatever it is that I'm reading, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or something else. I love that question. It's all about possibility and considering them.
It's all about possibility and considering them. And it really helps us understand another person in front of us, because none of us have the same perspective, not one of us. Because of everything in our past, we see every single situation differently. Even though ostensibly it may be similar, there are different factors that jump out as more than others, that we interpret them differently. And so the more that we can look at different perspectives on the page in a safe environment, the more we can actually consider when we're talking to someone, and not refuting them in the moment, but saying, that's very interesting. Let me see how that feels. And I'll tell you how I feel. It doesn't mean that you have to change your mind or I'm going to change my mind. It's just we're sharing.
Yeah.
And then it becomes this really expansive, healthy conversation and a healthy way to look at life.
Yeah. We need
so
more.
I'm not saying I can do that all the time, but I think I do it a lot more than I used to.
It's a good goal for us to do. Even just a little bit more than we currently are, the world would be in a better place.
Yeah, and I think that also I've taken a lot of these lessons into my work, which is teacher training, and I'm lucky enough to go into the classroom and watch other people teach. And I stand next to them or I watch them, and it's very easy to watch someone teach and, you know, make notes. And what I've learned is that I'm at my best when I noticed all of the positive things they do, and when I share the positive things they do. And once I can express everything I've seen, and I probably miss a lot, then they're more open to hearing a way that they could tweak something, a way they could change something, how they could relate differently to their students, that sort of thing. Yeah. So I think it all comes back to the study of fairy tales, where things look black and white because it's so much easier to see things in black and white. And yet there's so many shades of meaning. And most of the characters in the fairy tales, that seem to be who they are really are represent very different things. I mean, the king is not very kind. The prince is not very effective. The witch is our heroine. How much more do we need to know?
I love that. Now, for listeners right now who are like, heck yes, sign me up. I need to go back to a fairy tale. I need to look at this in a new way. Do you recommend either a particular book, a particular anthology, a particular tale, a particular resource online? Where would you point listeners to, where if they wanted to pull in a fairy tale into their reading life because they haven't in a while, where do we start?
Wow, that's a hard one. I would have to go back to the books and which one really affected me the most. I mean, there's one called Beast. The Beast is Blonde. I can give you the title, the author of that one later. I mean, there's just so many. There's, Baba Yaga, the Russian fairy tales, which just one of them in particular, I think her name is Jones. I can get that to you in my notes also. And it's a way of looking at
links in the show notes.
Yeah. But I mean, it's Baba Yaga is one of the most feared witches, and yet she puts a spin on it that shows you how many different spectrums there is of this witch. So there are a lot of them. I'm so happy to send this to you afterwards, because it'll also give me a chance to look through my books again.
Yeah, well, and I'm kind of fascinated because I see you, we're on a podcast, so they can't see us, but I can see you looking at what is probably a really gorgeous bookshelf or some pile of books as you're scanning them to recommend. So yeah, any recommendations you have, I'll put into the show notes for everyone. And then those that want to dip their toe back into fairy tales with a completely different view of how they can look at them will have a good place to start.
Okay, and there's also an article I was rereading. I wrote only one article on fairy tales in English. I did my doctorate in Spanish. And why did I do it in Spanish? It was really just to learn. I needed to improve my Spanish. But I wrote one article in English, and I was reading it just before, and it's actually explains everything I'm saying a little more verbosely, but I'll send that to you as well. And that might be one way to really see what I'm talking about with a lot of the examples from different fairy tales.
Yes, that would be wonderful. I would love that. And my goodness, kudos to you. Let me just do my dissertation in Spanish because I need to learn. That shows what kind of person you are and how you are constantly kind of pushing your own boundaries. I love that. Mine was in English and could only ever be in English.
No, I say no. Whatever challenges we put in front of ourselves, we're going to do them. But for me, it just was, that's what I did.
Yeah, so that's awesome. Yeah. So where can listeners find you if they want to either, find you for more fairy tale work or for your educator work? Where can they go?
Well, I have a website. It's called scaffoldingmagic.com. And you can see that the fairy tales have even influenced my educational site. And I have a lot of educational activities. And really, it's just, we were talking before, it has to do a little bit with reading strategies, but it's sort of like a burst of exciting activities before you begin in a unit. So if you go to scaffoldingmagic.com, you'll find a lot of my activities. And I'm also doing a podcast on incredible educators like yourself. And it's called Doorways to Learning with Donna. And I'm having so much fun on it and just talking to some incredible people. And hopefully, Stephanie, you will be on there. So
I would love to. I would love to. I think that's the best part about having a podcast is it's a great excuse to just talk to people who you're curious about and fascinate you.
Yeah, I agree. It's amazing.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Donna. This was such a fun conversation, fun and educational. In fact, that you've kind of blown my mind upside down about fairy tales, how I can read them, and then how I can read, the stories I'm telling myself in my own life, which I think is a huge takeaway from this too. So thank you so much for coming on. And I can't wait to do a little podcast swap and meet your audience too.
Oh my goodness, that would be amazing. Thank you so much, Stephanie. This has been absolute joy. I'm now living in the clouds again with all my fairy tale characters. So thank you for this.
Thanks. Oh, good. I'm so happy. Thanks. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. Plus, if you want more, you might like to join my Patreon community. There, you'll find additional inspiration for your reading and writing life, like bonus podcast episodes, bibliotherapy book calendars, monthly book clubs, notebooking challenges, live events, giveaways, and much, much more. It's only $5 a month, and you get instant access to all of the previous content too. You can learn more at getliterate.co. And one more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish and notebookish community too. Thanks for listening.